Welcome to Portsmouth This Week. This is a show that is taped once a week on Friday at 9:15 at the Peg Studio. And today's show on the 12th of April will focus on things that are going on in Portsmouth that are important to us. And specifically today we're going to spend a great deal of time talking about the East Bay Energy Consortium, which is an issue that our town council is going to be asked to make a vote on. And today, with me, I'm Jeff Richard, your host today. With me are, of course, our town administrator, John Klimm. Welcome, John. And Gary Crosby, who is the assistant town planner here in the town. And Gary is very knowledgeable about the history of the Energy Consortium's efforts, and we'll talk about that. So let's start right into that. John, what's important about EBEC?
Well, I think it's important since this issue is going before the town council over the next week. I've had more than a few residents start with what is it? What is the East Bay Energy Consortium, and when was it started and for what purpose? My understanding is that it was started back in 2009. With a collection of communities getting together, wanting to be more proactive in the area of energy conservation or alternative energy, those possibilities. And so these discussions began amongst the communities. And Gary Crosby actually is our alternate representative. We have Gary Gump, who has spent an extraordinary amount of time as a volunteer representing our town on the EBEC board. Gary is his alternate, and so Gary is more knowledgeable than I in terms of what has transpired over the last couple of years. So, do you want to talk about some of their goals and what the?
Sure. I should say right off the bat that Mr. Gump has made it very easy for me to be involved in this. He's taken the brunt or the bulk of the effort, and I've attended a number of the meetings, but been at least on the periphery just because of his hard work. But EBEC was born out of an event up in hosted by Roger Williams College. In 2009, the East Bay Leadership Summit, and at the time the communities all got together. There were representatives from all of the communities, and they got together and decided to try and put together this exploratory effort, the East Bay Energy Consortium, with the idea that we could take advantage of the opportunities given to us by the legislature for generating renewable energy at the municipal level, and maybe some way collaborating with putting together all the communities to do so. Each of the town councils adopted a resolution establishing membership in this group. It got some funding from Rhode Island Economic Development Corporation and from the Rhode Island Foundation. In order to begin this exploratory process, there was a memorandum of understanding. There wasn't anything anything very official apart from this memorandum of understanding signed by each of the communities to proceed with the process. And so they began to look around for sites in the East Bay. They looked at and rejected a number of sites in communities all around East Bay, and ultimately ended up selecting a site in Tiverton. Got the funding to put up a Met Tower to begin to.
What is a Met Tower?
A Met Tower is a meteorological tower. Typically, and it records wind speed and direction.
This perhaps can't be seen very well on camera, but this is a picture from the EBEC website. It is that very tower that just Gary was talking about, and it's been there now for about a year.
For about a year. Typically, that's what's
it was put there to retrieve information about wind velocity and all the things you'd need to know.
Exactly. We did not put up a Met Tower on our site when we were considering our wind turbine at either the middle school or the high school. We used wind data from Newport State Airport and from Raytheon and
I
from
recall that, yeah.
what was the other site? And from the Abbey turbine, the Portsmouth Abbey wind turbine, and sort of use that data for us. But typically what's done is if you want really good data from your site, you put up a meteorological tower. So that's where we are now. And in order for this organization to continue to be able to buy and sell land, issue bonds, and function as to manage and operate and manage a big project like this, they need this legislation from the state legislature to be passed. And
Does
so
that include taxing authority?
No, it doesn't.
It does not.
John can speak to that a little bit better, but it does not.
They don't have policing authority, they don't have taxing authority, but to become a entity that has the capacity to issue tax-exempt bonds, you have to either have police authority, taxing authority, or eminent domain authority. And that's, like, I think one of the challenges that we face is people are very skittish these days for obvious reasons about the issue of eminent domain, and that's the reason why it is there. And I attended a breakfast meeting with Council President Robichaud, and almost everyone that has been active with EBAC had a concern about why are we getting into eminent domain. It's controversial.
Now that explains it.
Yeah, we really have to. There were safeguards put into this that no land can be taken by eminent domain without the approval of the community. Right. So they did put safeguards in it, but that is one of the concerns I've heard. The other is more general, and that is people are saying, well, why create yet another agency and whatever? It sounds bureaucratic and whatever. And there is a bit of irony in that, because at the very time that we're looking to create efficiencies, and we are asking almost on a daily basis, how can we work with other communities? This is a perfect example. Instead of having all 9 communities replicate a level of expertise, staffing, and the like, this entity would be able to do that. It also allows Portsmouth, for example, to benefit from a project in Tiverton. The initial figures are that we might be looking at a net revenue generation of a couple $100,000 a year when this project is up.
To Portsmouth alone.
To Portsmouth alone. And so, and I think increasingly so in the whole area of New England, we're seeing more and more issues being raised about the siting of turbines. And so there may in fact be some locations that make more sense. They just happen to be in another town. From what I understand, this Tiverton site has a lot of benefits in terms of not being around residential areas, and the residents of Tiverton, the representatives of Tiverton that I've talked to, feel very strongly that this just happens to be a great site for what's being proposed.
It's town property presently. It's in part of their business park?
Their industrial park, yes.
Industrial park.
It's partly town property and partly owned by 2 water and fire districts over there.
I know about that one.
But the goal of EBC from the very beginning was to be able to generate, come as close as possible to generating enough electricity to offset the usage of the schools in the town at each of the 9 communities. So, which requires a rather large site.
That was one baseline chosen. It could have been any baseline.
That's correct. The idea was to get as close to being able to generate the power. And so,
profit-making part of it is like we do here with our turbine. We're selling energy to the national grid.
Correct.
And they are then giving us a buy on some of the cost of our use.
No, we sell every kilowatt that we generate we get paid for by National Grid. We don't use any of our power here on site. It all goes onto the grid, and we get paid for it. At this point in time, we're getting 8.7 cents per kilowatt hour.
That was a concern, I guess, early on in our discussion, and I think it would be in this as well. At what rate does National Grid have to pay for what they receive from this wind farm?
That is to be negotiated. You know, once we signed a what was it called? We pay a standard rate from them, and we signed a contract with them for that, and that rate rises and falls with this standard rate. But it started out at 11 11.7 cents a kilowatt hour, and has risen and fallen over time.
The distribution then of the money earned from National Grid would go to the 9 communities proportionate to what?
Proportionate to their participation in the community. I'm not exactly certain how this works. In our case, and I think that this has changed now. In our case, when we first put up our turbine, the state legislature allowed each municipality the ability to produce 5 megawatts of renewable energy. We, of course, our turbine has the capacity of 1.5 megawatts. So we have 3.5 megawatts extra that we can to explore other possibilities, a solar farm, or in this case, participation in this project. So, and I'm not certain whether this is exactly the way it works now, but I think that the legislation has changed to allow us to not have to use our 3.5 megawatts of capacity. But to answer your question, at least in the beginning, it would have been proportional to how much of that capacity each of the municipalities
There's an actual formula that all 9 communities have agreed to, and the major deviation gives additional benefit to the host community.
Yes.
So the host community, in addition to what all the other communities would get, would get a payment in lieu of taxes and also some fee for the rental of land. Yeah. So there would be an additional benefit to the host community.
But if this is incorporated, the present Tiverton site could be only the first of many sites. Would this consortium be enabled to, through eminent domain, find other sites about the bay that were also good?
Well, first of all, I think
that
having attended the meeting, I think I can speak for all 9 communities. There is no appetite for any taking of the use of eminent domain. I mean, that was very, very clear by all 9 communities that this is a partnership. And there are safeguards against that. As I said, not only are there provisions that say the host community has to approve it, if somehow in a hostile way EBEC in the future tried to take land in Portsmouth, for example, by eminent domain, all we'd have to do is get out of EBEC and no longer participate.
Okay, good.
Right.
And so there are those safeguards. The answer is yes. We certainly hope there are future projects, and they don't all have to be wind. I mean, one of the things that I'm hoping for is that EBEC gets much more involved with solar, because you're seeing across the country, but certainly in New England, more and more communities, for example, using their old landfill properties or whatever for ground-mounted solar, and there's been many, many successes in that regard. And the benefit of EBEC is that you don't have 9 communities each having to reinvent the wheel in terms of coming up with a standard contract, negotiating effectively, having the technical expertise. You could do it with one entity, and EBEC could be there to serve all of the communities. And so I certainly hope that they go much further than wind in their purview.
Good. I know that maybe at some future program we can discuss in some detail our own experience with a wind turbine. I think the more we know about the process, the easier it's going to be to march on staying in the same thought process.
It's probably the most frequent question I get from folks where I came from. How's that wind turbine working or whatever? So I think it would be really helpful to have a program on that.
Funny you should mention that. A high school friend of mine called several months ago and said, I understand you have a turbine. They're thinking about putting one here on the Cape. Can we come visit? And sure enough, they came. And I drove them all around the island to every single one of them, and they listened carefully to how much.
Sure. I get 2 calls a week in that regard, sure.
Well, it's growth industry.
Yes. Sure.
And isn't it, I think it's true, that in Rhode Island we can manufacture some of this. We have a great fiberglass, in our boating industry. We can make blades. It may be that there's some future to that.
Sure.
But, so we're expecting the town council now this week coming up to authorize you to proceed to what level of commitment?
To support the legislation. In other words, to give an indication to our legislative delegation that we support the filing of the legislation. There's an understanding that this will go through the legislative process. I'm sure it will change or whatever. And ultimately, I believe that, at least in Portsmouth, if this legislation passed, that there would be a desire to create an ordinance to make it even clearer what authority our representative might have on this board. For example, I'm making an assumption, though, but that the council would want to have the representative come back and ask the council for their guidance on a major issue about a new project or that type of thing, and that can be created locally through an ordinance. And so my understanding is of the 9 communities, 5 are already approved it, and next week both Portsmouth and Newport have it on the agenda. So 5 of the 9 have already voted to support the resolution.
Jean Napolitano from Newport, isn't she the chair of
yes.
She
Very
is
active.
that group right now?
Yeah.
So.
Our town will have at least 2 more bites of the apple here before it gets very far along at all. All this resolution does is say to the General Assembly, we support the idea of you taking this legislation and amending it and start the process. We would have to adopt, once this legislation is adopted by the General Assembly and put in place, then the town of Portsmouth would be required to adopt an ordinance to agree to participate and to in the parameters with which we would do so. So. By no means is this resolution doing anything other than just saying, yeah, let's start the process. We like it.
Concern would always be from the taxpayer's point of view. John, you mentioned that we'd expect to making a couple $100,000. How much tax money is going to go in to set this process up? I mean, where's the money going to come from to start building, assuming that it went through? Building the wind farm?
Well, short of state and federal grants, and I think that the feeling is that we certainly should be pursuing any available resources that are there, that the funding is going to come from the proceeds of tax-exempt bonds. The beauty of this independent agency is that we're not using the bonding authority of a community. So you're not financially responsible for the success or the failure of this entity. It's one thing if you're talking about one wind turbine in a community. This is a rather large project, and so the exposure would be significant for any one community. The creation of EBEC as an independent authority that has that can issue tax-exempt bonds takes all of the financial responsibility away from the community. That's probably the foremost benefit,
yes.
Other than having an entity, one entity that can do all of the research and become technical experts in this area, as opposed to each individual town. The number one goal here, or benefit I should say, is that it's not utilizing the town's bonding authority. And so financial exposure to the taxpayers is limited.
And in the town council meeting, when this will be brought up and discussed and voted on, is going to be?
Wednesday. Yes.
Very good. If I'd like to go on to another couple of subjects, very briefly, what might have gone on in our town with you over the prior week? It's been a week now since we gathered here. Lots of things happened. I think one of them was your capping or limiting the expenditures of certain lines within our budget.
Yes.
Could you talk to that? That's interesting to me.
One thing that occurs in Portsmouth that I'm not very familiar with is the ability to be flexible in terms of spending. What I'm used to is a budget is passed, and that is what you have to work with as a department, barring any unforeseen calamity or emergency or the like. That hasn't been the practice here, where there's been a lot of shifting of money and really an expectation that if you spend more than you have, then it's okay to go to the legislative body and ask for additional resources. The problem is that, as we've talked about in previous meetings, is that our fund balance is so low that we really don't have an adequate savings account for the community to be able to entertain a myriad of requests. And so I've tried to, in the strongest possible terms, convince the council to stop that practice, until we get to a point where we have an adequate fund balance, to implement more stringent rules and regulations about the ability of anyone in town to spend outside of their budget. And so we're asking the council to pass a budget policy that has that contained in it.
So right now your department heads have certain lines that they cannot exceed the spending from without talking to you.
That is correct.
Pleading for a particular
I've done
thing,
two things because of the financial challenges that we face. First of all, I've implemented that executive order, but I've also frozen a number of accounts with the goal of trying to build up the fund balance. So on I think a 32 or 34 individual accounts, I've literally just frozen them so that there isn't a capacity to spend anymore, and asked for an additional layer of review where department heads need to come to me and explain why the need is so pressing that we can't save some money and put it off for another year.
Understood. Speaking of that, then you also established a timeline for budget meetings or workshop schedules concerning next year's budget. The first one I see that you have coming is on April 30th, and the title is Capital Improvement Plan. And reviewing my understanding of where we have been in times past, if somebody said, Jeff, what's the town's capital improvement plan? I don't think we have one, and if we do, I'm not a taxpayer that knows anything about it. So this is maybe a new concept here for us. Could you talk first of all, in general, how you organize this budget meeting process that culminates on June 25th with the overall town meeting?
Well, the actual dates for the hearings have been set by the town council. That's within their purview. I did make recommendations. The first item, as you mentioned, is the review of a 5-year capital improvement plan that I presented 3 or 4 weeks ago to the town council. And it not only institutionalizes the idea that we're going to have a capital improvement plan every year, but it also combines the town operations with the school. So there's one capital improvement plan for the town of Portsmouth. And so on April 30th, the council will begin the process of hearing each project. Now, the desire on my part is not to get every single project approved, because those are political decisions that our town council needs to make. What the goal is to get all of the projects on the table so they can be discussed. Obviously, ultimately, the town council has to set priorities, and some will be funded, I assume, and some will not. But having that conversation with all of the other projects on the same consideration, on the same table, is really important. And so we'll be hearing from large projects like the $1 million request for our long-range public roads program, to repairs to one of our elementary schools to come into conformity with the relatively new state requirements for sprinkling, for the sprinkler system. That's in the area of $750,000, all the way down to some feasibility studies. The police facility and our fire facility, are they adequate to meet our present and future needs? Should we be looking at additions to the existing facility or new facilities or whatever? So the overall plan has some major expenditures and some relatively modest expenditures, but and this is a work in progress, since we only had about a month to put it together to begin with. But instead of having the council taking individual projects up from time to time without really looking at the overall financial liability of the town, this design is to put all the projects on the table and let legislative body make decisions on their
It
priorities.
hasn't been costed out yet. I mean, some of these projects, we don't exactly know how much they would cost.
Well, some of the projects would need to go out to bid still, and so they are only estimates. That is correct.
Okay, and that this process then probably fulfills the need for a 4 or 5 year financial plan that takes capital improvements out to the out years. And,
Yes. With the reality that within the limitations of the money that we have to spend, that we've got to set some aside for our infrastructure. You know, I can only speculate that we as a community really started running into financial difficulty 6 or 8 years ago. But we really have used a Band-Aid approach at times, taking money from over here to fund something over there, deferring maintenance, spending down our fund balance or whatever. And the message that I've tried to send to the council is that those types of short-term policies don't work, and we need to set a certain amount of the overall framework. I mean, the taxpayers and the citizens decide how much money the town is going to spend, and we have to work within those frameworks. But within those frameworks, my message is that it can't all go to operations, that you have to set some aside in a savings account, and you have to set some aside for infrastructure.
we've only got a couple of minutes left
Okay.
of our show here. That the process that the citizenry who wanted to speak on these various subjects will get to the microphone as after a major pitch is made. In times past, sometimes we've had a very limited amount of public speaking because of time constraints. Is it your intention to allow as much public discussion in these workshops?
Well, once again, I don't run I don't serve in the council, and I don't make the rules. I work for the council. But my understanding, certainly from talking to every member of the town council, is that they value public input, and there is an expectation, especially since this is relatively novel, that there will be an opportunity for folks to speak.
Good. We're down to 2 minutes here. I wanted to say that is this also on the website?
It will be today.
Okay, great.
As well as the plan itself.
Okay, great.
So people
That's
can
terribly
review it.
important. Yeah. The actual capital improvement plan and the schedule will be on our town website.
That's correct.
Great. Just in the last few seconds of our show today, I wanted to mention to everybody that when we're through here, the process will put this show on YouTube. And if anybody wants to get to it, all you do is Google YouTube, and when you get to the YouTube homepage, you go to the search block and you type in Portsmouth This Week. That's all it takes. I did it this morning before I came over here. And bang, and they've got all 3 shows that we have done so far, and this one will be here. We also know that we're going to put this program on the town's website.
That's correct.
And we also know that Brian and the PEG crew here put this show on Wednesday evenings at 7:30. So we are about out of time. I want to thank everyone for watching. And if John has mentioned before, if you have questions or you have thoughts you'd like him to address, you send that to his email address at the town hall. Thank you. Have a great day.